alt season. Has it been killed off for good? Or is this the setup for one of the biggest rallies we've had in the last couple of years? Now, we've seen billions liquidated over the course of the last week or so. But even these same bearish signals actually could be a very, very big springboard for the next couple of weeks. And yes, this is a bullish video, funny enough. And if you like bullish content, please do leave a like and obviously subscribe. I think things are going to get very, very interesting in the next couple of weeks, so you may need to strap in. However, may well be very selective, not financial advice, of course, but please do manage your own risk accordingly. Now let's talk about the market. A bit of a recap. Let's keep it super, super simple. Now, Bitcoin lost a couple of percentages, but also Ethereum had double the amount. And then the likes of Solana, XRP and stuff had even more than that, into the 10%. $1.7 billion was liquidated over the last 48 hours. Over the course of that time period, that actually is the biggest in 2025, which is a little bit scary for some people. And the scary part is, and the obvious part is, the fact that 95% of them were longs. Why? Greedy little piggies. And this is why the market moves in its way. And the Federal Reserve, yes, they did a 25 basis point cut, but the tone of Powell was relatively hawkish, calling it risk management, not a pivot situation. But ultimately, yes, as you can imagine, a bit of a textbook buy the rumor, sell the news. And over-leveraged traders will always get obliterated. This is why we find this cyclical element around content creation, around YouTube, around people's habits and failures and stuff. The problem is this market is still very, very brutal. However, that sort of brutality will create the opposite effect very, very soon when that liquidity tap turns on. Because what I'm going to say now could be very, very interesting. Where do we go next? The rotation map. So obviously the all-time high of Bitcoin is obviously here. And I put on my X account before, what if that's the top? And I'm just scaring, I'm just spooking you all, don't worry. But Bitcoin dominance did spike down to 57%, give or take. And that capital kind of flew away from altcoins into Bitcoin and back out again. And it's annoying me, right? So it's kind of not really flowing as what we'd expect. We had a little bit of a move, obviously, with the likes of Ethereum, as you can imagine. You know, here's Ethereum. Hello, welcome to the party, finally. And I still think this 4,000, 3,800, and 900, whatever level would be pretty good, but we haven't quite got there. And as much as we are showing risk-off behavior at the minute, the altcoin index did go pretty berserk, if you notice. It went into the 80%. And that's, yes, lagging data and all that kind of situation. But when we talk about the obvious in the room here, is the alt season coming? All depends on that. Let's be honest, it all depends on Ethereum. It all depends on XRP, Solana. You know, you could talk about, Cardano, AVAX, BNB, whatever it may be, but they still need to kind of flow in the same way. So let's talk about the simplicity of this. Now, the thing is, stable currency dominance, this needs to drop. It needs to keep on dropping. As much as it looks a bit ropey now on the 3-day time frame, it needs to just drop. It needs to go down into these 5% levels and then lower, right? We've had alt season failures before. So that's where we are right now. And it's looking all right-ish. It could be a lot better. But ultimately, we are in a period of a lull where it is September. And we'll talk about the seasonality in a second. But the fundamentals are very, very clear here, right? The one map will say one thing right now, that it's Bitcoin season, because Bitcoin is still doing the business, is still fine. But over the course of the last couple of weeks, actually been altcoin season realistically, but you're just not really seeing it. But remember, in every past cycle, we get this rotation last, realistically. So that is the big fundamental here. So when we talk about the likes of Bitcoin dominance, right? It has dropped a significant chunk. It is still below the EMA on the 2-day time frame, which isn't the best bit of technical analysis in the world, but ultimately it will probably correct up a little bit, but I don't know how high it's going to go. I know there's other content creators I think it's going to go much, much higher. Personally, unless we get a real breakdown in price, I don't see the kind of the situation where this is going to fly to the moon. And what I mean by that is if Bitcoin really nukes and then altcoins nuke even more, obviously that'll go up. But when we talk about the shakeout, and obviously the thumbnail says shakeout, we may well get a correction here. And let me talk about that in a second, so don't go too far. But the bullish case is very, very simple. We are still on track, and I will talk about that in more detail, but the fundamentals are very, very simple here. We've had it in the past before, in previous cycles, right, where this, hold on a minute, you'll see it, does nuke up, right? So we've seen it before in previous cycles where When we start looking at this, we do get this surge to the upside, then boom, all the way down. Obviously, timeframes are obviously different. But the situation around that could be very different this time around because the likes of the Ethereums and XRPs and Solanas have probably bottomed realistically in the BTC pair. It'll take a hell of a lot for that to go below that structure point and even lower, which could be very, very fun to see. If you're interested in more content from myself, 2 to 3 hours extra coverage and content and discourse and stuff, jump in. I will be closing this if we get a euphoric mental craze. So despite the bloodbath, right, we're talking about 3 clear tailwinds for a Q4 bullish period. I know. But the first one is actually the ETFs institutions, right? The reason being, right, let's go to the obvious. ETFs on Bitcoin and Ethereum has been really strong. They're still holding, there's still a number of retail/institutions buying somewhat their products, right? Which is good. Solana, XRP, Litecoin, whatever, ETFs, 75 to 90% likely to get approved. That could also happen and get more people interested. Now, yes, it is a product. It's a simplistic version to get into crypto. If you just have cash, they supply that product. And that is actually a relatively good use case for it. Likewise, when we talk about the Ethereum one, it hasn't been great recently versus what it was, but it is still chugging away. It hasn't nuked itself, which is great to see. And you can see here, it's somewhat slowed down a little bit, but it has had a really big rise, which has been a big, big thing for why we are in a position of, what, $2,000 to $4,000 Ethereum. And to kind of back this up a little bit with institutions and companies buying treasury funds and stuff. You know, yeah, Michael Saylor, love him or hate him, he's talking about macro headwinds. You know, treasury companies and ETFs are upward pressure on cryptocurrency. You've got to remember, the ETFs are one-to-one. They've got to have the actual spring to kind of offer the product, right? Scarcity will become a factor eventually over the course of time, and we will get a situation if there's too much liquidity somewhat, and then not enough Bitcoins or Ethereum to go around, it's going to create a bit of a surge, it's going to create interest, and people are going to get very, very interested from that point. Now, let's talk about Fed liquidity. The situation was the Fed cut was more hawkish than anticipated. That is probably why we had a bit of a price reaction, also sell the news event, right? Now, historically, yeah, whatever. But ultimately, the whole situation is we have still got that situation of the old dot plot of 2 more rate cuts by the end of the year. That will equal rocket fuel in some cases, more risk on for that situation around the assets, and more importantly, it is Q4, which will come on to the seasonality. Now, whether that data changes between the next Federal Reserve meetings or whatever happens is up for debate, obviously. But more often than not, you probably find that with the data and the information and employment data and all that kind of stuff, it's looking more and more likely that we are just going to get those 25 basis point cuts twice, right? So another 0.5% off, which is fine. But it isn't what was actually anticipated over the course of the year. So they have kind of cooled it down a little bit. But you also don't want too many rate cuts. It will create an issue. So that in itself could be a really good tame area to get the market stability there. Confidence is there, and we just go. And yes, the final point and the most obvious tailwind is seasonality. September is a bit crap. Realistically, it doesn't do much. It's very, very wishy-washy. But October, strong month. November, strong month. December, we'll see. But even if we do get a correction, a shakeout before the surge happens, and we may well get a bit more of a correction, we could talk about that. There's still a situation where the bounce could be unbelievable, and it could well get people in, institutional liquidity coming in. And more importantly, Federal Reserve liquidity. What happens to the gold liquidity? What happens to all the other situations where people are getting very, very excited? Because there will be a price point where we will see people want to come back to this market. But I said correction, the final shakeout, didn't I? I did. The risks of this. The risks remain real. There is a stupid amount of liquidity and leverage playing around, or more importantly, dumb money that are playing with leverage because they don't have enough liquidity, right? That is a sentiment swing that could cascade into a bit of a fuck up, basically, right? Long story short. Now, the macro data, yes, it looks relatively soft in that situation. If we start seeing things fail and recessions and doom and gloom, you're going to see people panic. But ultimately, we've got to look at the fact of we have not really, right? Oh my God, I'm going to say it, had a very big meaty correction for a while in Bitcoin. Now, when we talk about corrections and the risks here, we could talk about the fact that from this period, from the inauguration to tariff sell-off, we had a 32% correction, right? Okay, cool. We haven't really had a meaty correction since then. Now, if we're going to do a 30-odd% correction, we are going to go back down to the fucking doldrums of 80-odd%. Well, $80,000, sorry. So that could be fun. So be mindful of it. My personal opinion, I would be looking more around this point, this 100K level, in and around this previous area of real levels of resistance and also support. This wouldn't shock me. The reason being, when we look at this, swing, situation, we have gone to the 618 levels, but ultimately we could talk about the opposite. Now, we're going to put a fib on the fucking chart. We could be looking at situations where we are looking at this $102,000 level, give or take. So I would be looking at maybe a bit of a brutal shakeout for some people, but it may actually be quite a good opportunity. But as I say, that is the risks of it. And we will probably get more and more people shaken out before we get a run. That is kind of funny enough how markets move, unfortunately. It doesn't just go up only. And we have had a period of up only, and we are in a correctional kind of phase. And I've said this before in my channel previously. Make sure you subscribe so you can stay up to date with it. But at the end of the day, it just depends on where you find the opportunities are going to present themselves, because ultimately, if we do a bigger correction on Bitcoin, it's going to be pretty nasty for altcoins. By the way, not financial advice, of course, but if you do want to jump into an exchange before all the things cut off because it's too crazy, Blowfin have a brilliant offer. It's open to the UK. You don't have to worry about KYC neither. I highly suggest you get an account and using it, because if it goes into a bull market, you're probably not going to get anywhere. The final thing, my approach in this market has not changed. I am still very, very, very heavy in Bitcoin, and I will continue to be. But I am keeping an eye on the likes of the Total 3/BTC, the Ethereum/BTC as a potential trigger to rotate some capital potentially into some altcoins and make a bit more money. At the end of the day, there will be narratives. There will be a situation when certain things do happen. And obviously, yes, this is starting to trickle up. As I've alluded to it, the stable currency dominance, if that drops, it's going to get very, very meaty and interesting. And likewise with the others/BTC or others.d, we are still very low. So you haven't quite missed the boat yet. Some people think that you have. You see big assets do really well. Go, oh my God. But realistically, when the tap turns, it will turn. And I've seen it before. We talk about 2023, 2024, that end of, year run. It was bonkers for a bit of a period with the AI boom. That sort of situation will happen. It will be very, very small, slow and sweet. But if you buy the obvious, they probably will do all right, realistically, because liquidity will flow into them first. But ideally, we need the likes of Ethereum to start chugging it when, again, obviously this has gone up quite a lot, but realistically could go back up again as interest returns. As I say, it's a bit of a wishy-washy month. But the trick is not to over-leverage, not to get greedy, and not to get FOMO. So yeah, personal opinion, I think we're going to get a shakeout. Do I think alt season is dead from the past? Yes. I don't think we're going to get a 2017 or even a 2021 big boom run. There's too many altcoins, but selective coins will do well in my viewpoint. They will absolutely fly, and they will be 100% an opportunity to jump on that trend and make some money. You've already seen it before in the past. It will probably happen again in that certain situation. But you need to pick the right things. You need to look at the obvious. And I think the obvious is the winners, realistically. And I know for some people that is horrible. But yeah, jump in my Patreon. I talk about a free video on a Monday about the market overall. And what I said then was pretty much happening right now. You just got to be bloody patient. Anyways, subscribe for more. And yeah, if you're interested, watch this video that I'm recommending. It may will help you a bit more.